In episode 22 of Mobycast, Chris recaps his experience attending a rare and privileged workshop at the AWS offices in San Francisco. Welcome to Mobycast, a weekly conversation about containerization, Docker, and modern software deployment. Let's jump right in.
All right, good morning. Welcome, Rich and Chris. It's another Mobycast.
Hey.
Good to have you.
Hey, guys.
Rich, our producer, what have you been up to? It's so hard for me to say, what have you been up to this week without stumbling over those words? Go ahead. What have you been up to this week, Rich?
I have been up to not a whole lot. I've been heads down for the last week since I've been back from vacation, playing catch up. So just a lot of house cleaning and project management and trying to deploy a few projects this week and next week. So much more heads down than anything else.
Right on. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, I'm going to copy paste Rich's answer there, except instead of coming back from vacation, I'm looking forward to going on vacation here in about 2 weeks. So heads down, kind of making sure everything is buttoned up and in good shape, and then have some time off, going to go to California.
Right on. I bet everybody listening is like, I want to work at Kelsis. That guy's on vacation all the time.
Well, let's be clear. There's been a lot of travel recently, but not really vacation.
Cool. And as far as copy pasting goes, I have to share this joke I just saw on Twitter. Somebody that was speaking at a Google conference today, and the thing that everybody's been tweeting is, good developers copy, great developers paste.
Yeah.
So funny. And then as for me, I'll give a little plug to one of our clients. I've been thinking about one of our clients this week because we've been kicking off a marketing campaign with Rich's help from Secret Stash, just to help them grow and hopefully cross the chasm. Their name's Zupix, and they are the social media for pets. Get your politics out of there, get your whining out of there, and just enjoy pictures of furry animals. And it's pretty fun. So it's good to see that take off a little bit, and it's fun to play with the marketing and see what works and what doesn't with Rich. So that's what I've been up to. So this week we're going to take a little break from talking about DockerCon remixes, doing those DockerCon talks that we've been doing for a few weeks, and get back over to AWS because Chris had an experience that not that many people in the world have had, and I think it's worth talking about. So Chris, recently, I guess it was about a month ago now, you went to an AWS exam development workshop. What was that? What is that? What is its purpose?
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of a mysterious sounding thing. So what it is just like many other tech companies, Amazon and AWS in particular have certification exams that they have that cover the type of material content in various different areas. And these exams are taken by folks to kind of demonstrate and prove that they are experts in those areas, and they can get their certification as an expert. And so these exam workshops are basically writing content for these exams, and making sure that it's proper content, it's testing the right stuff, and making it out there onto the actual exams that these candidates are taking.
Surely, if you are writing all that content for all those exams, they must have given you a free pass and certifications on all of them just automatically, right, Chris?
Not quite. I actually thought long and hard about whether or not to do this. Just because it's quite an investment in time, right? This was a 3-day workshop and involved travel. It's actually pretty difficult work, and you're not compensated for it or whatnot. But there are some very much kind of more subtle, intangible benefits, and that's the reason why I did it. And I'm overwhelmingly glad that I did. But as a token of appreciation, you do get a voucher to take one exam, complimentary. So
okay, there you go.
And it can be any exam. So I'm saving that one for my Solution Architect Pro when I go and take that one.
Nice. I'm excited for you to take that one. So how did you get involved with this? Do they just, anybody, they're like, hey, we have a hard time finding people to write these, so please just come, or how did you get involved?
Yeah, so they have a pool of subject matter experts, SMEs, and from that, so it's basically a list of, here's folks that have taken exams and passed them, kind of recognized as subject matter experts, and that is their pool of people to pull from. And they have actually quite a few of these workshops going on throughout the year across not only the U.S. but also in other parts of the world as well, focusing on the different exam topics as well as different parts of the exam development process. So it's not just writing the questions is just one portion of that process. There's other pieces to it, right? Like you have to kind of figure out what is the content that should be covered, right? Like who is this geared towards? Like what should that person be able to do? So there's workshops just on that kind of stuff to figure that out.
That's pretty interesting. And knowing you, and I've been thinking about this a little bit before too, because I can't imagine that just anybody that passes one of these exams is automatically like, oh yeah, you should write questions for it. I gotta imagine there's maybe, and knowing you, like, and knowing your skills and strengths, like I imagine you really nailed it. Like you probably, got sort of over towards the end of the bell curve on people in terms of people's performance. So I wonder if they do have sort of a threshold like that they keep to themselves, but you're above that threshold of people that they're hoping to write questions.
Yes, that's a good point. Just that, and now kind of like thinking back through the process, like there is quite a vetting selection process that gets involved. So the way that it worked was, I went to reInvent last year in November 2017. I kind of decided at the last minute to go ahead and take one of the exams there, and I did so. Passed it, and one of the things that they mentioned was like, hey, if you pass your exam while you're here, and if you would like to participate in our SME, be considered for our SME program, just let us know. We'll take your information. Kind of ironic. It was a pad of paper and pencil, right? To get added to the SME program.
That's so funny.
It was just like, wow, that's so refreshing. Here we are at like this reInvent conference where just incredible technology, where it's like we're putting facial recognition into a camera that you can mount up at your garage door and have it sent back to the cloud. And here it is, we're jotting down names on paper,
right,
on pencil. So that kind of started the process. I think a few months after that, they reached out with a questionnaire. And it was actually pretty extensive. I think if I remember right, it took me at least 15, 20 minutes to go through. It was a many-page questionnaire, just going through all just experience and background and whatnot. And then after that was when I started. I think I got put on a mailing list, and it's just whenever these workshops were happening, they would bounce in my inbox, let me know that, hey, there's one in New York, there's one in San Diego, there's one in Dallas, and for various different both exams as well as types of material. So I'm not sure exactly how much more vetting they did on the back end. Like I know they obviously have things like LinkedIn, and they can go and look at your history and whatnot and experience level. But that questionnaire that you have to fill out was pretty involved and pretty extensive.
Interesting. Yeah. So for people listening, if it's something that you want to do, if you want to get involved in one of these workshops, I imagine that you may have to have some experience in the industry, as well as I wouldn't be surprised if you have to get a fairly good score on your exam. So yeah, once you decided to sign up, then you traveled down to lovely San Francisco, one of my favorite cities, and tell us a little bit about the experience.
Right. Yeah. So this was an item development writing workshop, and so again, that essentially items is the Amazon lingo for a question, an exam question. And so this workshop was a 3-day workshop where...
Sorry to interrupt. That's what happens when developers decide the names of things.
Actually, one of the things that was kind of like eye-opening for me too is that, like, putting together certification programs and exams, like, that's a career. Like, there are people totally. They do this as a career. So they're the ones actually probably that comes up with this terminology, because there are a lot of specific terms to this.
Okay.
So that was pretty kind of interesting and eye-opening to me, and that you have people that, like, this is their specialty, and they can make careers of it. And there's obviously there's quite the demand for it. Like I said, there's so many companies out there that have these kinds of training programs and certification programs and whatnot, and even ranging from very formal to more informal.
Hey, this is Rich. You might recognize me as the guy who introduces the show, but is pretty much silent during the meat of the podcast. The truth is, these topics are oftentimes incredibly complex, and I'm just too inexperienced to provide much value. What you might not know is that John and Chris created the training product to help developers of all skill sets get caught up to speed on AWS and Docker. If you're like me and feel underwater in these conversations, head on over to prodockertraining.com and get on the mailing list for the inaugural course. Okay, let's dive back in.
Another little sidetrack to that. I mean, just if you happen to be listening, you're like trying to think how you can climb the corporate ladder and get really high up in the corporate ladder. Finding those things that are maybe not the highest demand types of jobs is a lot of times it's a great way to get to climb the ladder quickly, find yourself in a VP role at a big company, and get all the same benefits as the other VPs in the same company that fought tooth and nail for years and years to get where they got. I think of a few tracks like that, but not to take anything away from the exam developers, but I can't imagine that there's a lot of people sitting in computer science class right now thinking, or even any other type of class that are imagining that they're going to be corporate test writers. But go ahead.
Supply and demand, right?
Exactly.
If supply is low, then your economics are definitely in your favor. So for anyone out there that wants to pick up COBOL, by all means, there's quite the opportunity still there.
Right.
Yeah. So that was the focus of this workshop, was basically like, let's go and write new items, new questions for this exam. And it's for one exam. It's for the solution architect associate level exam. So content's covering, that material that the solution architect exam covers. And maybe some other things to point out. This was, they mentioned that this was a rather large group. I think we were probably about 15 people big. And so, that may not sound like a lot, but for a workshop like this, especially with how much review goes on, it was large, but also very, very productive and really interesting to get so many different perspectives and whatnot. Of that, I believe there was 3 of us that were not Amazon employees. So most of these things I think are definitely sourced from Amazon. And so it almost felt definitely like even that much more of a privilege to be there as a non-Amazon employee. They definitely had to go through a bunch of hoops just to accommodate us being there. Like things like building access was different. Getting access to their communication tools like Chime and some other like just silly stuff like scheduling and travel arrangements and whatnot. So it's definitely more of a hassle for them to have external SMEs participate in this. But for my part, I'm glad that they did, and it was really a great experience being there. There was several folks there that this was not their first workshop they'd been to, and some of them were like, wow, I've never even known that we had external folks participate in this. So that was interesting. So yeah, I don't think it's all too terribly common. Maybe they're kind of branching out now, and that's going to become more leverage that more going in the future. But I think in the past, it's probably been more heavily internal only folks participating in this.
Interesting. So, you go through the actual workshop. You're spending 3 days doing this. Is it pretty much just heads down working? Or are you working with other people? What is that? What was that like? Like, were you just trying to, sit there thinking of ideas for test questions, or were you brainstorming with people, or what was the interaction like?
Mm-hmm. I will say I was like just totally blown away by just how difficult of a process this was. Like writing exam questions, it's not an easy process, and it forces you to use the knowledge and experience that you have with these things and kind of flip it on its head and think of it in a different way. So the overall process was individually. You would come up with ideas for exam questions. You would write them up, develop them, and then once that happened, it would then go into a review process. And again, you're in a room with a whole bunch of other like SMEs that really know what they're talking about. So it definitely, and you're writing a question that, hopefully is going to end up on the actual final exam, testing this. So it's definitely a high bar for content. You want to make the question hard enough, but not too hard. Again, this was for the associate level, not for the professional level. So have to keep that in mind. Obviously there's guidelines and guardrails for the type of areas that your question can test. So just spending the time of kind of like coming up with like what would make a good exam question that would stay within those guardrails for content, be at the right level of difficulty, and definitely be technically 100% correct with no ambiguity, right? Like this has to be very quantitative, not qualitative, right? There can't be any subjectivity about it. So once you did,
so I just feel like I have a hot take from this. I want to extrapolate what you just went through that you said involves mostly AWS people, and in sort of an intense work exercise. And you said that it was largely individual with a little bit of collaboration at the end. And it sounds like it was very polite. It sounds like there was nobody that was, it was polite and maybe a little bit formal, not super informal, like with people just kind of like throwing ideas around type stuff. And then also the other thing that I kind of picked up on was that you kept talking about a high bar, and that when you all came back together to review questions, that there was maybe a sense that if your questions weren't very good, you would be a little ashamed. And that sort of tells me that there's maybe a lot of competition. And I just want to extrapolate this to the rest of AWS, that it could be that, you got to see a little bit of what it's like to work in that technical, to be an employee there. Like, could it be that it's fairly formal and it's fairly, high level of competition among people, stuff like that? Do you think that that's possible?
I think, some of those are definitely spot on. Some of that, maybe clarify just a little bit. So the item development portion of it, of actually writing the exam questions, that was definitely very much independent. But then this review process that happened was extremely collaborative and polite, but very everyone. And this was made very clear at the very, very, very get-go. Like, it's all about constructive criticism. At the end of the day, all that matters is that the best material is created for these exams, and that it's not a judgment on the item development author. So this review process was extremely rigorous. Again, I'm not really convinced that this reflects Amazon culture, because again, there was a few of us that were external. I think this just reflects just folks that are experts in their fields, just having opinions and being very knowledgeable and taking the task very seriously. So there were times where we would have quite animated discussions over like a certain word, right? Like should or can, should versus can, or, best versus, slowest versus fastest versus optimal, right? That kind of stuff. So the bulk of our time was spent doing review. Because what happened, so you'd spend a certain amount of time individually, heads down, people writing these questions. They would then, once you finished your question, that would go off to editorial review, where it's just basically making sure that it's adhering to all like the linguistic guidelines that they have. Like you're using proper case, you're using proper, the correct tense, and you're using the proper third person language, some syntax type thing. So an editorial review, once it went through that, there would be a technical reviewer that would go through it. And this technical reviewer wasn't even part of this group. They were actually somewhere else offsite, and that was just part of their job. Wow. Was to be there. They were again, a very in-depth technical expert that would go through and they would do their pass at it to verify that this was technically accurate. One of the things you have to do as when you're writing your exam questions is that you actually have to cite proof of what you're saying the answer is, right? So it has to actually link to something that's produced by Amazon, that's publicly available, that shows that definitively shows that your answer is indeed true. So it would go through. So those are the kind of things they're looking for in that just baseline editorial and technical review process. And then after that, it would be group review. And that's where we spent the bulk of the time in these. So you can imagine we did split into two groups because it was so big. But you have a group of 6, 7, 8 people together and reviewing these exam questions, and like it would be like you were taking the exam and just going through them and then debating is this a good question? Is it technically accurate? Is it concise? Is it covering the right material? Does it all that kind of criteria? And so most of those reviews for an exam question, it was not a quick process. It's not like 60 seconds done. Like some of them, like it took a while. So, and again, those we did, it was made so that ideally you were not in the room, in the same group that was, for questions being reviewed that was written by yourself. Right. So, we did get into a point where sometimes that did happen, and that's not very fun either. Right. To actually be there, when your stuff is being reviewed, and to kind of hear some of the comments. So people were not there necessarily to be polite. It was really just about like, let's make sure that like this reflects the best possible material and that it is indeed accurate. It's testing the right stuff. And it's all in the spirit of just generating the best output. So
did anybody, when you were split into groups of 6 to 8, did anybody talk about how you are 2 pizza teams? And is that your first time ever as part of a 2 pizza team at Amazon?
Well, I've never worked at Amazon, so I can't say about that. But and then also I can't say like no pizza was served.
No.
They did a wonderful job with catering and food, and they had, they had breakfast and lunch every day, but no pizza.
Cool. So we got to wrap it up. Any last takeaway that you'd like to? I mean, for me, I guess I'll say my takeaway from this is is kind of interesting to hear about the rigor of how AWS puts together its tests. And I do think that it's interesting to think about whether that rigor is a reflection of something deeper in the Amazon culture, in the AWS culture. And I'd like to believe that it maybe is. But yeah, other than that, any other takeaways you'd like to bring out?
Yeah, I just, as far as, again, I was just surprised by, how difficult it was to do this. This was like very mentally taxing, a very mentally taxing 3-day workshop, but at the same time, super rewarding being around such a great group of people that knew more than I did, right? Like to actually, to be in that and to, hear their ideas and feedback and to learn some new nuances of the technologies was a great experience. The other thing, definitely some tips for those that are interested in planning to take these exams. I would say that it feels like in the past the exams were more. I don't know if I would say they were designed to trip you up, but they were definitely trickier, like in a more of a down in the details level, and kind of a bit more maybe esoteric. And it kind of feels like now they are driving more towards making it just much more real world relevant. And, things that like normally like an expert wouldn't have to remember, that they would actually just go look up. Like it may be like, what's the maximum throughput of, a certain service or something like that in megabits per second. Those absolute numbers, like that's not the stuff that really want to verify and test on. It's really more like just the practical concepts, and how does it apply to you actually being an expert in these technologies to be able to develop the correct solutions for folks that need it. So I think it's a great direction that it's moving in, and it'll make the exam that much more relevant for folks that do pass it, to say, yeah, I can go out and hit the ground running and actually do the kind of things that this exam is supposed to be proving that I can do.
That's great to hear. Yeah, because I definitely think that these types of exams should be fairly passable for people that have spent a good deal of time in AWS without too much study of esoteric facts. So good to hear.
Yep, indeed.
All right. Well, thank you, Chris. And thank you, Producer Rich. It's another good discussion on Mobycast. Talk to you next week.
Thanks, guys.
Later. Well, dear listener, you made it to the end. We appreciate your time and invite you to continue the conversation with us online. This episode, along with show notes and other valuable resources, is available at mobycast.fm/22. If you have any questions or additional insights, we encourage you to leave us a comment there. Thank you, and we'll see you again next week.